Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today for our post-election briefing about the road ahead for anti-monopoly food and agriculture policy. I'm Jessica Cusworth, Senior Communications Manager at Farm Action and Farm Action Fund, and I'll be facilitating our webinar today. So I'd like to start out by briefly introducing our two farmer-led organizations. Farm Action develops and advances solutions to stop corporate monopolies, hold government accountable, and empower farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. Our political partner organization, Farm Action Fund, builds the political muscle to take action in our state and federal capitals and at the ballot box. And together, our organizations represent a seamless chain of action from research and policy development to the adoption of our policies through legislative action by elected officials who support our vision. So let's go ahead and dive into what brings us all here today. With the 2024 election now decided, we'll discuss the implications of the election results and present our policy roadmap for the incoming Trump-Vance administration. Here's what we know. For too long, dominant corporations have abused their power to steal farmers' livelihoods and put once thriving rural communities in decline. Meanwhile, consumers are paying more than ever for food. We have unacceptable rates of food insecurity and diet-related chronic diseases, and the US is importing more of its nutritious fruits and vegetables, which is causing an ever-growing agricultural trade deficit. This simply can't continue. Our elected officials must prioritize farmers and families over the profits of dominant corporations. Today, we'll discuss the policy actions needed to loosen the corporate stranglehold over our food system and empower farmers to supply their communities with safe, nutritious, and abundant food. So first up here, we're going to hear from Farm Action Fund President Joe Maxwell to discuss the implications of the election results. Then Farm Action Fund Vice President and President of Farm Action, Angela Huffman, will discuss our policy roadmap for the incoming Trump-Vance administration. We're going to have 10 minutes for audience Q&A afterwards, and you can go ahead and use the Zoom Q&A feature as we go to submit your questions. And with that, I will pass it over to Joe Maxwell to dive into the election results.
They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. We think if this picture could speak, it would say, a new beginning when billionaires and populists can come together with the president so long as they eat a Big Mac. We appreciate you joining us here today. We want to go through the process here of just kind of our assessment. We want to make sure that everyone understands that this presentation will be through the lens of a farmer-led, anti-monopoly, nonpartisan organization focused on the food and agriculture sector. Republicans have successfully won the trifecta in Washington, D.C., giving them the full control of the direction this country's food and agriculture policy will head, at least for the next 2 years. President Trump, along with the influence of RFK Jr., shows clear signs that as it relates to our work and mission, there is a reasonable basis for hope for reform in the food and agriculture sectors. In campaigning for the presidency, President Trump moved hard towards commitments for, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my, I apologize. In campaigning for the presidency, President Trump moved hard towards commitments to the wealthiest individuals and largest corporations, but at the same time, pushed for what would be considered very populist policies and made strong commitments to RFK Jr. that may counter to the interest of the large food corporations and those that financially benefit from their market power. It is the issue, in our view, of Wall Street versus the people. I think it is so clearly depicted in the picture that we showed. President Trump has nominated RFK Jr. as the HHS secretary, but has yet to make a pick for the USDA secretary. Many names have been reported to be on the list. As of Friday, we were made aware that RFK Jr. was having some influence on the decision process for USDA secretary. However, this week, that influence may be beginning to be marginalized by the big food and agricultural interest in Washington, D.C. We recognize that this is a key appointment for the success of our work and our mission. We're concerned that in this appointment, the president may not be draining the swamp. In the Senate, we see the final makeup of the U.S. Senate has put the Republicans in the majority. The Republicans have taken control and have also chosen a new majority leader, Senator Thune from South Dakota. Another factor we are taking into consideration as we make our assessments for the future is the changes in the U.S. Senate Agriculture Committee. Republican Senator Boozman will be the new chair. But with Senator Stabenow retiring, Senator Klobuchar, Democrat from Minnesota, will step up as the ranking member. Senator Boozman's policies in the past, including the Farm Bill framework released earlier this year, align closely with Big Ag's interest. While Senator Klobuchar, although supportive of many antitrust issues, has historically been hesitant to confront corporate power in the food and agriculture sectors. Additionally, the defeat of Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio and Senator Tester, while not on the Ag Committee, really leaves a lot of issues that we have focused on antitrust and farm policy up in the air. As I explained in my closing, we remain committed to educating policymakers on abusive power of corporate monopolies in the food system and pushing for the necessary protections for farmers, ranchers, and rural communities. Going into the new Congress, we do see reasonable opportunity for advancing antitrust legislation, particularly in the cattle market, at least within the U.S. Senate. Although in the past two Congresses, Democrats in the Senate have been more vocal on antitrust reform, bipartisan initiatives opened the door for legislative action in this new Congress. Notably, Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, has introduced the Strengthening Antitrust Enforcement for the Meatpacking Act this past session, along with co-sponsor of Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat from Massachusetts. And Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican out of Iowa, has been a leader on cattle market competition for years. As a member of the Agriculture Committee, he has advanced the 5014 Spot Market Protection Act as just one example. We will continue to strongly support his efforts. Additionally, Majority Leader Thune has sponsored the Cattle Price Discovery and Transparency Act and the American Beef Labeling Act, and has previously pushed for Senate review of beef market practices. There's not been a more important issue to America's cattle producers, independent cattle producers, than the labeling transparency the American Beef Labeling Act would give through a mandatory country of origin labeling on beef. If successful, his leadership could further prioritize these antitrust and pro-farmer and rancher issues in the Senate. In the House, Republicans are assured to have at least the 218 seats needed for a majority. With the Republicans maintaining control of the House, both Speaker Johnson and Ag Committee Chairman Thompson will be keeping their positions. Under the House rules, the majority party and their committee chairs have a little heavier hand on what policies get to the floor than perhaps in the Senate. As it relates to Farm Bill, Chairman Thompson has already successfully delivered at least a bill out of the House Agriculture Committee this year. However, in this Congress, the Speaker did not take that bill up, lacking the votes to carry it forward, mostly because some funding issues had presented themselves, as well as some differences within the Republican caucus. We believe that with the close majority that the Republicans hold in the House, these similar issues will present themselves in the new Congress. Therefore, it is our assessment that there is opportunity to continue, as we have in the past, on an effort to get a farm bill more in line with our issues, focused on protecting America's family farmers and ranchers and their rural communities. Our opportunities will most likely be in actions and amendments offered on the House floor, and that the new Congress won't establish their committees and committee membership until they convene in January 2025. We will have to wait and see who's on the Rules Committee before we can have a full sense of the opportunities and a full assessment. All the amendments will more than likely have to continue to go through the Rules Committee before they can be brought to the floor for a vote. We see great opportunity based on public support for anti-monopoly reform going forward in the new Congress. A quick snapshot of election results reveals that the public is with us on the issues. 88% of rural voters in battleground states during this last election cycle say they would be more favorable toward a candidate who supports cracking down on meat processing monopolies and ensuring local businesses can compete. The issue on right to repair was favored by 83%. The other fact we're taking into consideration in our assessment is the election was closer than the election map would indicate. If 119,566 individuals in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania had voted for Harris instead of President Trump, then the outcome would have been different. Because of this narrow margin of victory or defeat, depending on the party, both parties are likely to be courting these voters. Using the high public awareness and interest and how large corporations need to be reined in the market, using that as a lever, we must pull hard on that lever and continue to hold on to it. We must keep this level of awareness among the general public. Much has been said since the election that the Democrats lost because they did not talk about the highlighted issues that I mentioned, even though the Biden-Harris administration had taken bold steps to take on corporate power across most sectors. From reports, it appears there is a move by some Democrats to move their party back to being seen as a working families party, taking on some of these anti-monopoly issues. And the Republicans, of course, will want to continue to erode the Democrat, which was evident that they had eroded Democrat support among working families. And so both parties are likely to engage these voters to maintain control or gain control of the Senate and the House in the midterm elections. At the same time, we believe President Trump will be successful in putting in place his tariff plan. As we have written, because of the state of concentration in the domestic market, tariffs will act more as a tax or an increase in cost that will have to be passed on to U.S. businesses and consumers, thus could continue a state of inflation in the U.S. We believe this will leave many Republicans searching for something to point to other than the president's tariffs or his policies, opening them up for a discussion and messaging around calling out corporate power, as we did in this past election, pointing to the price fixing that is going on, costing consumers and farmers. We believe with the current environment, it is reasonable to have the perfect opportunity to get both parties pushing for antitrust reform and action within the next 2 years. I'll now hand it over to Angela, who will outline our recently released transition document to the new administration. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Joe. Well, at Farm Action and Farm Action Fund, we believe that the fight for a fair, sustainable, and healthy food system is the nonpartisan issue whose time has come. A handful of large multinational corporations have gained unprecedented power over our government, food, and farm policies to the detriment of everybody else. We're at a breaking point where urgent action is needed for America's farmers, workers, and our rural communities, and for the health and security of our country. 4 years ago, we presented a policy roadmap to the incoming Biden administration highlighting areas where we found we had common ground and spelling out the policy actions needed to deliver on those. Along with our supporters and allied organizations, we got some important wins: a crackdown on abuse of the Product of USA meat label, stronger merger guidelines to prevent future mega mergers in the food system, ongoing investigations over restrictions on farmers' right to repair their own equipment, and litigation over price fixing in the meat industry. These put the first crack in our consolidated food system in over 40 years, and we expect to start seeing the impacts of these new policies. So today, we're gearing up for the incoming Trump administration that, in a change from his first term, is calling out the industrial food complex, pledging to shut the revolving door between government agencies and the industries that they're supposed to regulate, calling for regenerative agriculture to make America healthy again. And the public momentum behind these issues is greater than it's ever been. We know what we're up against. We see our role as a government watchdog and a corporate watchdog. And when the Biden administration took actions that we opposed, we called them out on those and held their feet to the fire. And we're prepared to do the same with the Trump administration. We won't agree on everything. But today we're here to talk about the policy actions that we aim to advance, and we're ready to get to work on these. So I will share my screen. All right, so we have published and released a transition paper for the incoming administration called Securing America's Food and Farm System, a roadmap for the Trump-Vance administration. And I'll give you a little preview of this here. What we've done is organized our policies into 4 pillars. So the first is America First. Give America's independent farmers, workers, and small businesses a fighting chance. Second is Buy American. Feed American families with food grown on American soil. Make America Healthy Again. Support farmers producing nutritious foods. And finally, Drain the Swamp. End government corruption once and for all. So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk through some of the policies in this document. As we go, please do put any questions or comments in the Q&A box, and we'll be discussing those next. The first pillar, like I said, is America First. Give America's independent farmers, workers, and small businesses a fighting chance. So this is about leveling the playing field so that the people producing safe and healthy food in this country have a fair shot to do that. Here, we're calling for policies like stopping foreign farmland ownership so farmers can have better access to land, blocking USDA's rule mandating that farmers use electronic ID on their livestock, supporting America's food workers, who are often the lowest paid and most powerless workers in the United States, and ending corruption in checkoff programs. And that's where farmers are taxed to the tune of $1 billion in total each year. And the government gives that money to lobbying organizations representing global food corporations. Folks close to President Trump have indicated that we need to clean up or even end these abusive checkoff programs if they can't be redeemed, and we couldn't agree more. So our policy document shows how to clean up this waste, fraud, and abuse so that America's food producers have a fighting chance. Next is Buy American. Feed American families with food grown on American soil. Here we're saying that we need to stop outsourcing American food production to other countries. We show how to balance the agricultural trade deficit. The mighty U.S. ag system is not feeding the world. And in fact, we're not even feeding ourselves. Our current record ag trade deficit is driven by our reliance on imported fruits and vegetables. And that's because the government incentivizes farmers to focus on growing corn and soybeans used for cheap sugars, starches, and oils that end up in highly processed junk foods and for livestock feed. Many people might not be aware the type of corn that is grown on 90 million acres across the Midwest is not even edible for humans. It's a shame that government policies are preventing US farmers from feeding our own people. We're also calling for a shift in government food procurement to local and regional American producers. So government is the largest purchaser of food in this country, but today they're buying that food from abusive multinational and foreign corporations instead of supporting our own farmers and businesses. We call, finally, under this pillar, we call for restoring mandatory country of origin labeling for beef and pork so that foreign importers have to disclose where their products are coming from, and US cattle and hog farmers would have a chance to compete. These are all ways to focus on buying American and feeding American families with food grown on American soil. The third pillar is Make America Healthy Again, support farmers producing nutritious foods. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has acknowledged that making America healthy again starts with a diversified regenerative agriculture system, and we couldn't agree more. You know, one issue is that while the government recommends in their dietary guidelines, they recommend filling 50% of our plate with fruits and vegetables. Only 4% of federal farm subsidies support the production of those. So again, here we're calling for more support for farmers growing healthier, domestically produced food, including fruits, vegetables, and also regeneratively raised livestock. And we outline how to do that. Same goes for risk management programs like crop insurance and access to credit. We urge the administration to expand their offerings of those to support more diversified and regenerative operations that do feed their communities, not just those that are growing commodity crops used for corporate livestock feed and highly processed foods. And then finally, the last pillar here is drain the swamp and government corruption once and for all. At the USDA, as with many other government agencies, the revolving door between high-ranking officials and powerful corporations has really compromised these agencies' integrity and weakened their ability to uphold the trust of farmers, ranchers, and the broader public. President-elect Trump's pick for USDA secretary is crucial. We're calling for the appointment of a USDA secretary who is not beholden to the world's largest corporations, someone who represents all farmers, and ideally someone who is a farmer themselves. We're echoing RFK Jr.'s commitment to shut the revolving door between government and the corporations that they're supposed to regulate. We're proposing in our document here a 5-year cooling off period to stop government officials from moving straight into lobbying positions. So that's an introduction to our policy roadmap. I appreciate you all taking the time to hear our thoughts. I'm going to invite Jess back on now to moderate the Q&A.
Yep. So we have got some time here to answer the questions. Thank you all for submitting those. So our first question we're going to start off here is, what would be the impact of more Trump tariffs for farmers?
I could take that one, Jess. So we don't recommend a broad across-the-board approach to tariffs. The US, we're lacking in domestic production, and our food system is in the hands of just a few global corporations. For example, there's a 200% tariff proposed on John Deere, who's moving their operations to Mexico. We would expect that John Deere would then raise the cost of their equipment sales in order to cover what they're paying in those tariffs. But the problem is there's not many other options for US farmers to buy their equipment. So those couple of other manufacturers out there are likely to just raise their prices too. often in such a consolidated sector, we see companies coordinating on their prices and not competing. But there are a few sectors that we think that it could help. One is for our fruit and vegetable growers. Here, there's room in the US for more farmers, for this industry to grow. So tariffs on vegetable imports could create an advantage for US growers who wouldn't be subject to those tariffs. So we think that an anti-monopoly approach to trade, one that uses targeted tariffs strategically and couples those with additional antitrust enforcement, would be a stronger approach.
Thanks, Angela. So we've got another question here. Says, I appreciate the transition plan you put forward. Where do you see states' rights fitting into your suggestions, especially with the looming EATS Act threat in the Farm Bill?
I'll take that one. One, we strongly support our position is strongly supporting states' rights. We believe that many issues are better decided at the state level, and that in regards to the EATS Act, we believe that it is an opportunity. We have farmers who are having opportunity for market access that they had been denied because of the concentration in the commercial hog production. Those farmers have been able to benefit from the decisions made by the overwhelming majority of citizens in California in the adoption of Proposition 12. We will continue to advocate for the EATS Act or any version thereof to not be included within the Farm Bill.
Okay, so our next question here, what are your thoughts about how the border and deportation and H-2A issue will impact farmers reliant on migrant and undocumented farm workers?
I can take that one. So this is a real concern for a lot of people. We know that half of farm workers are undocumented. A mass deportation plan could have really serious impacts on those workers, on their families, and on our food system overall. So while Farm Action does not have specific policy expertise in immigration policy, this is something that we're going to be watching really closely as it develops and working alongside our allies, especially those representing frontline food and farm workers.
Our next question here, what is the definition of regenerative agriculture? As far as I know, there are no official standards for it. Bayer Monsanto claims to be regenerative. It seems to me that the word regenerative is being co-opted by big moneyed interests.
I'll take that. Farm Action and Farm Action Fund have really pushed into this area with concerns, just as this individual has raised, about organizations like Bayer Monsanto being able to co-opt the term regenerative agriculture. We also have weighed in and pushed back against the Biden administration and Secretary Vilsack's support of certain practices that we believe are counter to carbon sequestration. What we have been pushing for is scientific, verifiable practices across agriculture that can demonstrate that it mitigates climate changes, that it mitigates extreme weather. Most of us, I'm a farmer, face it's just not the way it used to be down on the farm. We are having severe droughts, and then we have floods. Most of us on the farm recognize that there is extreme weather. If we're going to lean in with tax dollars and support on these initiatives, We want to see the farmer benefiting from that effort through verified scientific research that indicates the practices that we're doing build soil health, that mitigates the climate change. We want to make sure the Bayer Monsantos, the other big grain traders in this country aren't the ones that receive the benefit, and the taxpayer doesn't see any benefit and the farmer is left out.
So our next question here, what is the outlook for rules proposed by USDA under the Packers and Stockyards Act with the new Trump administration?
I could take that one. That's something that we're looking at really closely. It's a little bit premature to answer that today, as we don't have an ag secretary appointed, because we think that whoever's in that role is going to have a lot of influence over what happens with those rules. Where we are right now, a couple of rules that were developed earlier in this administration have been finalized, and those are pretty safe. The most recent rule addressing the poultry tournament system, the rule addressing harm to competition, those have both, they're proposed rules. There's been a comment period, the period is closed out, and those rules are not finalized. Unfortunately, those are, we think, the most important rules. So we've been urging the USDA from day one to really hurry and get those rules going. It's deja vu, you know, because this is where we found ourselves at the end of the Obama administration under the very same ag secretary, Vilsack. There were rules outstanding. A Trump administration came in, and that USDA secretary withdrew those rules. So we think that those two rules, those two outstanding rules that I mentioned, are extremely vulnerable. They could be subject to a CRA, whereby the Congress would basically kill those rules. USDA could potentially withdraw the rules proactively to protect them and kind of save them for the future. And then I'll mention there's one other rule that it's just a notice of proposed rulemaking on cattle markets that's also very important, that would be very vulnerable as well. So on those three rules, it's kind of a wait and see. I think if we get an ag secretary that is there to represent the interest of farmers, we would be somewhat optimistic that we would have a good shot with those. So stay tuned.
And on that note, someone is asking what names we're hearing for possible USDA secretary.
I'll take that then. There is a long list. What we understood on Friday last week, that there was, had become a very short list of maybe as few as two. The information we had received was that RFK Jr. and the president had met, compared notes, where they shared similar names for this critical position. Those people were put at the top of the list. We're uncertain as to what changed from Friday late afternoon through the weekend, but it is, it would seem, this is based though on what we've read in reports and not any other information source, that the president has opened up a new line of thinking for which he is moving on. We had heard that Jimmy Emmons out of Oklahoma, this was on Friday, a diversified farmer, has cattle operation as well as grains and seeds, as well as Sid Miller, Commissioner of Ag in Texas, were on the short list. We've not heard different than that other than what we had read in the paper. or in several of the ag journals, as well as I think Politico.
Thanks, Joe. Our next question here, which among Farm Action's 4 pillars is the team most optimistic about progress on with the new administration?
Maybe we could both take that, Joe.
Okay.
I'll give my opinion. I'm very optimistic. I talked about this a little bit in sharing the document, but checkoff program reform. One, this has been our top priority for years, because for folks who don't know, like I said, that money, checkoff dollars are taxed on farmers. That money, $1 billion every year, is taken from farmers and given to the world's largest lobbying organizations. And those groups are working, they're fighting the farmers, the very farmers who are forced to pay into the programs. They're fighting animal welfare reforms, environmental reforms, reforms for food workers. Basically, anybody fighting for a fair, healthy, sustainable food system is under they're fighting checkoff dollars, and they're fighting lobbying organizations that are funded by checkoffs. Folks close to Trump are calling to go as far as ending those programs. And you've got Elon Musk, heading up a program to clean up waste, fraud, and abuse. It's a bipartisan issue. We've seen over the years with legislation supported by Senator Mike Lee out of Utah and Senator Booker out of New Jersey. There's also a House bill. We've seen a great numbers of co-sponsors on those bills, just a lot of momentum. Farmers want it. So that's where I would be most hopeful. I don't believe we've ever seen an incoming president, his transition folks and his policy-making folks talking about checkoffs. So I think that right there is a really encouraging sign.
I'll answer the question with a lens to just the lay of the land politically out there in the states. I mentioned this in my opening remarks. What is quite apparent is that the overwhelming number of U.S. voters understand that corporations have too much power and they're getting screwed because of it. I've been working on these issues for about 40 years. I don't ever recall in any cycle that large of a majority of citizens had that kind of awareness. I am optimistic that we will see the ability to pass or have the administration take action on a broad scale antitrust reform or antitrust enforcement. I do think it's, for those of us working in this area, I think, though, it's up to us to keep that awareness level at that height, the 80 percentile. I think it's important for us to understand that we're not going to ever pass or ever have great enforcement of antitrust because of one party. As I outlined in my opening remarks, I think that the stars are aligned for both parties to begin to understand that the people care about this and that the corporate power is hurting them. Whether it's because they believe that from a policy value point of view, or because they understand to take the control of the House and the Senate, or to maintain control, they have to move into that area. I think that's where we're going to be. And I think we can be very positive about both parties, taking a look at these issues and moving several of our priorities down the road.
We have another question here. Someone is asking how people with experience in the areas you're focused on volunteer to help.
What's top of mind for me, I'd love to share about our local leaders program. So, and you can take a look at that right on our website. I think it's under the join menu. But But this is a group, a wonderful group of folks who are leaders in their community and coming together, working with us. We have bi-monthly calls where we share kind of inside what we're hearing on the inside policy wise. We're listening to those folks and getting their feedback. They help inform our policy decisions, and we provide support for, you know, connecting them with reporters who are covering these issues or writing an op-ed and helping them get that published. So we have a great kind of symbiotic relationship with these folks on the ground. We're always looking to expand that network, and so we'd love to welcome anybody into that group who would have an interest.
We have time for maybe another question or two. So this one next, why do you want to take acres out of crops such as feed corn and soybeans when those crops feed animals that produce food for humans, such as meat, milk, and eggs?
Angela may want to add some from her lens as well. First, the United States is going to have a record year on having a negative agricultural trade balance. It's going to be about, it could get as high as $45 billion, 42.5 billion, somewhere along in there. As Angela said in her remarks, I'm a farmer. We hold ourselves out as this agricultural powerhouse to the world. We claim we feed the world. Well, the fact is, this great powerhouse, and my farm raises corn and soybeans as well, this great powerhouse is running a negative trade balance. What we're suggesting, when you look at the data, and Farm Action has taken a deep dive into the data, that trade imbalance is because we are importing food crops like fruits and vegetables, which are a higher value item, and we're exporting corn and soybeans. And that is attributing greatly to this trade imbalance. We're not suggesting all the acres become fruits and vegetables. I think it's about 0.5% of the current U.S. agricultural acres. If that shifted, 0.5% shifted to fruits and vegetables, we would get close to having to balance our trade deficit. That is a national security issue, a food security issue, and an opportunity for other farmers to engage in other crops besides soybeans and corn. So we think it's a realistic goal. We're not saying shut down all corn and soybeans. What we're saying is let's shift. Let's make sure that we have the programs for fruit and vegetable producers that are at least on par with the same opportunities and risk management and capital access that I have as a corn and soybean farmer. We also have livestock.
Thanks, Joe. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for questions. We weren't able to get to all the questions, but if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to send those to our email account. We're going to drop that email in the chat. Yeah, just want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Do keep an eye out. We're going to be sending a recording of this webinar, so stay tuned for that. Thank you all.